Hello, economics students. In this video, we're going to move on to our next aggregate supply policy, the second last dot point of the study design of the whole course, and it's skilled immigration. Uh, Australia has a really interesting, a good and a bad history of immigration into Australia, and I think it's worth going back and having a think about the different changes in immigration patterns into Australia. It's obviously very important in our history. We're not going to do that in this video. We're going to think about how skilled immigration impacts the population, the productivity of our labour force, and the participation rate in the labour market. From there, we need to make our standard aggregate supply argument. So once we see an improvement in productivity and the participation rate, how does that impact the productive capacity, aggregate supply, international competitiveness, our three macroeconomic goals, and living standards? Now, that sounds like a lot, but it's the same argument we make every time. So, you don't need to know too much about what happens in Australia in terms of migration and the policies around how migration works, but I think it helps to have a little bit of context. So each year, the Department of Home Affairs, they sit down, they look at the skills shortage list, which has been compiled through industry, and they work out how many visas they're going to allocate to each skill group or each skilled stream. So they might say, we need 20,000 doctors, we need 50,000 nurses, and they set a limit on the amount of visas that they will issue. Over the next 2 or 3 years, Treasury has estimated that there'll be over 600,000 skilled migrants moving to Australia. Many of those will end up in Melbourne, in our great city. And really, all we need to think about is how would having 600,000 skilled migrants moving to Australia, how would that impact those aggregate supply things that we always think about? So we focus only on the skilled stream, skilled migration. There are lots of other skilled visas. There's family visas, business visas, innovation visas, and so on. We don't need to worry about those. So how does skilled migration impact population? Well, of course, more people coming to Australia increases our population. But why is that important? And the demographics of Australia has led to this phenomenon called, well, not really called, but an aging population where we have a big chunk of skilled, knowledgeable, experienced workers leaving the workforce, leaving the labour force, and retiring at the same time. And that's a problem for the economy. It's great for those people who are retiring and who have worked hard to retire, maybe even some of your parents soon, but it leads to capacity constraints and shortages in the Australian economy, right? We lose a whole bunch of skills and knowledge. And the best way that the government see to replace those skills and knowledge is to bring in skilled migrants from overseas who have that skills and knowledge from another country. So it increases population, but it also fills the gaps that have been left by Australians leaving the labour force because they're getting old. How does it affect the participation rate? Well, almost all of skilled migrants who come to Australia participate in the labour force, obviously, because that's why they're coming to Australia, which will lead to an increase in the participation rate. So we would say if there's an increase in both the labour force and the working age population, if we calculated that and times it by 100, if we increase both the denominator and the numerator, we'll get an increase in the percentage or an increase in the participation rate. Whoops, wrong way. Finally, we have to think about how it impacts productivity. And of course, the skilled migrants that come to Australia have skills and knowledge and experience. They innovate, they come up with new ideas, and so that improves the productivity of Australian workers and maybe even capital. They also fill skill shortages and increase competition amongst existing workers, all of which is to say that it will improve productivity because we'll get more outputs from a given level of inputs. Okay. So once we get to an improvement in productivity, it's the same argument we made with education. As soon as you can say there's an improvement in one of the aggregate supply factors, which of course productivity is, we go straight from there and we say, well, businesses can produce more. They're more willing and able to produce, which is good. It's another way of saying there's an improvement in the productive capacity or an increase in the productive capacity. The aggregate supply curve shifts outwards. We become more internationally competitive. We can say our cost of production goes down, and therefore we achieve all three macroeconomic goals in the longer term. So this argument here is not new. It's something we've made in every video on aggregate supply thus far. Okay, it gets a little bit tricky when we think about material and non-material living standards because there are some negative effects of bringing 600,000 people into Melbourne. Melbourne's predicted to have 10 million people living in it. I don't know when, in 20 years or something. It's certainly not built for 10 million people. So there are some issues, right? So how does it impact material living standards, our access to goods and services? Well, if we can improve international competitiveness, if we can bring some of the best people around the world into Australia, we get better at what we produce and we can produce it for a lower cost. And if we can sell those services or goods back into the global market, it's going to create more jobs for Australians. And that improves our access to goods and services. Industries may be hurt. So certain industries may actually face a decline. And certainly one of the arguments is that Australians who already live here may lose their job, may face competition from overseas workers, and that may lead to job losses. Absolutely not happening at the moment because we have very high vacancy rates. There's heaps of jobs available. It could also hurt our access to infrastructure. My school in particular has got a lot of population. Green spaces get overcrowded, roads get overcrowded, hospitals, doctors, all that sort of thing. So it could be a decrease there. In terms of non-material living standards, certainly brings with them new culture and multiculturalism. You could lead to more acceptance in Australia, but it could also put stress and anxiety on the existing population. So you can think about the benefits, all the negatives from the material living standards perspective, all the other things it's good for, improves aggregate supply, achieves all our goals. All right, reach out if you've got any questions, and bye for now.